All right, well, good morning, everyone. And I'm really happy to be here again with you all on this Thursday. Tuesday seems like a really long time away. And I'm excited to talk more about some of the important roles that assessment plays in our HyFlex designs, but I'm going to really drill down on something that I would call the extension dilemma that I think maybe a lot of us experienced in the last fall and spring as we've returned maybe to in-class experiences, and we've maybe seen our designs perhaps being influenced when we add the role of extensions. So just really quick, I'd like to, together with all of you, ponder the idea of assessment, flexibility, extensions, and equity. And when I'm talking about extensions, I'm really talking about, the timing, what happens when we add more time or expand time, and what that might do to our, how that might impact our assessment. So we'll kind of explore that. And also, are extensions the same thing as flexibility? Can they be less intentional or more intentional? I'll share my experience with you from the same class I referenced on Tuesday. And this is similar to Tuesday's presentation of flow versus flop, which is, I really like to hone in on what didn't work so well, or what experience could I share with you that might be more beneficial for you to think about in your own designs for the coming year. And then we'll end up with reflecting on some of these ideas and how we can really think about extensions as flexible, but not necessarily spontaneous, which I think is where some of the issues come up. So just to get us started, there was a great article written in the New York Times by Jonathan Malesic, and his title was "My College Students Are Not Okay." And what he wrote about in this essay really resonated with me and a lot of other faculty that I've been talking to over the last year. And while this quote may be a bit blunt, ultimately what he's talking about is that even though we've returned to in-person, we have not returned to in-person, say, fall 2019. That it is and I feel this way as well, it is a different context in person now. And his point is that it's possible that students, having been online now for multiple years, they may not have learned as well, but they also may have developed some habits that are not really good for learning, and they've brought those habits back into the in-person classroom. And just out of curiosity, let's see, in the chat, I would love to hear from you, but maybe with just a yes or no. In the past fall 21 or spring 22 semesters, did you notice students had developed some less desirable habits for completing their work? So just in general, do you kind of see some habits coming back from the online environment in your classes that may be undermining students' learning? Okay, lots of. I just put the link also to my slides in case anybody wanted that. Okay, well, thank you for, I got a few yeses there. In my general interactions with my colleagues, and again, this is not to put students down, I'm not being derogatory. I very much am at that. We need to meet students where they're at. And yet the kind of the notion here is it possible that we're leaning too much towards students, and then the idea is that we're not getting them forward or progressed into the level of achievement that we want for them, and that may be happening in kind of a progressive manner. So just a couple other instructors from that essay were also making the same comments, and from different disciplines. So we've got someone from English just commenting on how she felt like being in person was like being on Zoom, and I felt the same way. A lot of times that the students were just kind of still in that black box, even though we were face to face. And that all tended to kind of slow things down a bit. And another instructor here who's in biology courses, they won a teaching award on the campus, and yet students are not coming to class. So this makes me wonder, if we just focus in on extensions, Are extensions a part of our flexibility designs, or do we consider them just a way to be flexible for students? And is it possible that we've got some less intentional online carryover around extensions as opposed to really intentional pacing that is supporting student learning? And we see through our assessments that we are supporting learning the way we want, or maybe our assessments are losing some of their validity, right? So here's just a little reminder, right? Why is feedback so important? To me, I think of assessment, I use the word feedback in class for students because I want them to know why we're doing projects and what the grading and feedback is doing for them. So I always use the word feedback, and we know that feedback needs to be precise. I mean, it needs to be well tailored to the objective you ask them to do, and it needs to be timely. And that's what I want to hone in on, is timing. Is it possible that as extensions accumulate over the semester, that feedback has likely been compressed and underutilized in ways we may not be very aware of until we get a chance to do it for a whole semester and reflect on that, which that's the experience that I'm bringing to you in my reflection. I really hone in on assessment quite, and I use it and promote it as a tool for learning, but I don't think I quite realized what was happening over the spring semester. So to share my experience, as you can see here, you might remember this from Tuesday, it was really quick, but this is my visual of my spring 2022 class, where I did something a little different at Chico, where I introduced HyFlex in modules 1 and 2, not every day, just a couple of days. And then in modules 3 and 4, we practiced. Some days were in person, some days were in person and Zoom, some days were in person, Zoom, and asynchronous. And then by the time we got to the 5th module, we had more HyFlex weeks. And I stand by this statement over here. My learning experiences were designed with formative and summative assessment feedback, cycles for low, moderate, high stakes tasks that supported knowledge development towards deeper understanding in a progressive, iterative fashion, building up the application of understanding for more challenging analysis and evaluations. I mean, I think I have a beautiful plan, and yet it did not play out that way, and I couldn't really put my finger on it. This is that same model, but I'm laid it out kind of in a linear, like this is what it looks like across a semester over time. And you can see I've got my examples of all the, I've got my examples of the different tasks, the different learning. So we have wikis, we have discussion posts, we have group quizzes, etc. And then we have exams, and all of those smaller little cycles lead up to the bigger cycle. And then that essay exam actually supports the next group, which then the second essay exam builds off of that. So I think it's really well designed, but here's what it actually looked like after I got to look back on spring 2022. And what it actually looked like is, if you notice, can you see how everything's kind of pushed to the right? And what happened is that as I kept adding extensions and basically moved from everything being due, we had Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, everything coming up on end of the day Friday, to that turning into end of Sunday, which ultimately turned into end of Monday. So, and we called it a due date window where people could get it in on the regular time, because we were still on track, but we were pulling it out, and that kind of started to compress and everything started to get moved. I noticed the students were only working at the end of the cycle. All of the development stuff was not happening so well. And if I add the cycle back, so originally I had these really nice, beautiful feedback cycles that were balanced and iterative and progressive, but they did not turn out that way in real life. Everything started to get compressed. The feedback cycles were shortened, and all the cushion I had built in was removed. And so my real concern too is, were those adjustments helpful for all the students in equitable ways? Like when we offer more time, is that something that all students can make use of in the same way? In this class, this semester, I had 24 students. Normally I have about 35 to 40. So it was nice to have a smaller group, which I thought I could have much more effectiveness with, but that was not the case. What I came to realize is that the extensions, they weren't planned for my original planning, and they seemed reasonable when we switched to these windows. But what didn't change was I wasn't getting my full feedback cycle. And we would still stay on course and start the next module or the next level, but the students were just getting feedback and they're not processing it as much, because in their eyes, they just finished it. They're going to stop thinking about my class. They're not going to come back until we're close halfway through the next module. And they will say to me, they have said to me, Dr. Avanzino, I start working when the deadline starts. And everything I have designed is about working up to the deadline. And so I could see that there was a real disconnect there. So in reflection with what time we have left, Kevin, how am I doing?
About 4 minutes left.
Great, that's what I have too. So I would really like to hear from some of you, because I've always found it most useful to, like, everything that Kevin presented prior to me, I feel like I did. And trust me, I'm not, trying to humble brag. I really work on assessment a lot with program review and course level assessment. And yet I still was undermined by this carryover from the pandemic, of the role of extensions and the belief that I was helping students. But I think that it's not necessarily always helping the students and always in the same way. So I'm sharing my reflection with you to think about your designs and see if you have any comments to add. When you offer extensions, are they intentional? Will extensions still allow for meaningful assessment and meaningful feedback loops or timely feedback loops? I saw my feedback loops, but they were not as timely, and I think they lost their meaningfulness, right? And then just how might you be both flexible and maintain equity and quality feedback? So does anybody have a comment, or I see people putting them in the chat. Due date gets confused when the due date to do it. Yes, I agree. It's the due date that's when I do the work. Yazdan, yes.
Thank you. I have done this in my classes. When the due date was not respected, I used some token. So, in the beginning of the semester, I gave all the students 5 tokens. And when they are late, they lose 1 token. So this was the thing that, I used. But normally after, I think, a few weeks, everyone will get into the line and these things will not happen again. The classes that I had was 40 students for pre-calculus, and I had 12 students for gas dynamics. These were my experiences.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you sharing that. And gosh, I wish, mine had worked out as well. I'm actually pretty direct with the students, and I don't just change deadlines willy-nilly. We still maintain our objective, but I really got to tell you, I had a lot of pushback, and Kevin talked about some of the implications. I really got some negative feedback, not negative in the sense that the students did not appreciate nor enjoy nor want to be held accountable. So when I did try to hold them onto our deadlines, the extensions just kind of became an expectation, even after the window had passed. So that was the negotiation I had a hard time with.
Okay, Susan, I have a question here. Did in the beginning you told students why you are doing this? For example, why you are giving them the authority to do submit again. Did you in the beginning told them why you are doing this?
Yes, I love the why, Yazdan. I'm so about why are we doing this and why are we doing this way? So that's why I keep coming back to, I'm not trying to blame students. I mean, clearly I needed to do some things better. And yet I'm trying to account for, and this could be Chico State students also, there's very much, the student really seems to be in the driver's seat. And I usually don't have an issue with that, nor do I have an issue with students respecting deadlines or what I ask them to do. But I'm noticing some interest. I love due dates for drafts can be helpful. So I try to do that. They just keep telling me that they're not going to do the work until it's due. So I really need to crack that nut. Some other good ideas here as well. I think I'm probably at my end of my time, Kevin.
You are, but feel free to answer some of those comments in the chat as we transition to Arcadia Levias Chakwudafu from Cal State LA.
Let me stop sharing my screen and get out of your way.